Question. I'm interested in the unconditional love of our Creator. Therefore, can you talk about it? Why our mind, or rather linear mind, can't grasp unconditionality? And what is unconditionality, by the way? So you see the irony here. Why can't our linear mind grasp unconditionality? But then you're asking, what is unconditionality? How am I going to explain that in a way that the linear mind can grasp? And this is actually a really important point to get when you talk about unconditional love. Because you cannot understand unconditional love. I spent quite some time in the early 2000s. I was really contemplating this unconditional love. And it took me a while to wrap my mind around it, because it took me a while to come to the point where I accepted that my linear mind, analytical, intellectual, reasoning mind, logical mind, has limitations. I didn't really grasp that at the time. And so it took me a while to realize, in other words, I came to understand with the linear mind that the linear mind has limitations, and therefore the linear mind will never be able to fathom what unconditional love is. And let me try and explain what helped me. So let's take something. Love. Love as we know it in our world, here on earth. For many people, love is possessive. In other words, you say to somebody, I love you, and it's a statement of ownership. Many people will feel when they say this, I love you to somebody, the other person is obligated in a certain way. It can be different for different people. But let's say you are a young man who has a crush on a girl, and you tell her, I love you, and then she's supposed to just surrender and give her love to you, and you are going to live happily ever after. That's possessive love. There are also many relationships where people seek to control others through love. And this is what I would call conditional love. Because the idea is, well, first of all, the love becomes, as I said, you're putting conditions on how the other person should react to your claim that you love them. But it's also that love is something that a person can withhold. And therefore, in order to get love from that person, for example, your mother, you have to live up to her conditions. And if you live up to the conditions, then she'll give you love, and if not, she'll withhold it and give you the silent treatment or whatever it is. And so, so this is clearly conditional love, right? And so one way to explain unconditional love is to say that it's love that there's no strings attached, there's no obligation, there's no ownership. And there are no conditions you need to fulfill in order to receive it. And where can this unconditional love come from? It can only come from an unconditional being. A being that's beyond all conditions, because it's beyond all form. And that's God, that's the Creator. So, where I look at it is, incidentally, that I can't produce unconditional love. Only the Creator produces unconditional love. But what I can do is I can open myself up to it, to receiving it, and letting it stream through me. But I'm not producing it. That's why I can't withhold it. Well, I can withhold it because I can close myself to it. So when it comes to unconditional love, we don't have the option of saying, okay, I'm going to choose to live up to this condition and then I'll get unconditional love. No, you only have one choice. You can accept unconditional love, you can reject it. And most people, of course, are constantly rejecting unconditional love. That's why they have never experienced it. The simple thing is unconditional love. It's unconditional, right? So it is raining upon the just and the unjust constantly. You are right now. You are bathed in a stream inundated in a stream of unconditional love from your Creator. If you don't feel it, it's not because the love isn't there. It's not because the Creator has set conditions. It's because you have created conditions in your mind that are causing you to reject it so you don't experience it. And what are these conditions? Well, one of the conditions is the image of God we've been brought up with. Because we have been brought up, at least in the Judeo-Christian theist tradition, to see God as a conditional being. The angry old man in the sky who will send you to hell if you don't worship him or obey him. And so we've been brought up to think that God's love is conditional. And I actually have met people on the spiritual path who couldn't accept the idea that God's love is unconditional because they couldn't let go of the image of the judgmental God. And this was partly because, the ego is by its very nature judgmental. So many people, they like being judgmental of other people because it makes their ego feel superior. The ego raises itself up by pushing other people down. So therefore, the ego is always looking for ultimate justification for its behavior, including being judgmental. And what is the ultimate justification for judgmental behavior? Well, God is judgmental, so why shouldn't I be? Because there are those people, they are behaving in a way that God doesn't like and approve of, and that's why I can be judgmental of them, and it makes me feel superior that I know how God looks at it. So this is ego. And so this is one thing. If you have this view that God is a conditional being, you can't receive unconditional love. How could you? You can't even conceive of it. You can't even accept that God's love is unconditional. So where did this image come from? Well, as I said, it came from the ego, because it came from people who are trapped in ego, who are projecting their own state of consciousness upon God. So you had some, in the old days, biblical times, you had some angry men who were running around in the desert somewhere, and they were projecting their own anger and judgmentalness upon God so that he could seemingly validate that they could do whatever they wanted to do, like go in and smite their enemies and take their land and this and that. So this is the one element of it. But the other element, of course, is, as I explained in many of my videos, the separate selves that we create when we go into the state of duality. Because I've explained there's the 48th level of consciousness. When you're above it, you see yourself as a connected being. When you go below it, you see yourself as a separate being. And once you go into duality, you cannot conceive of, understand, grasp unconditional love. Because everything is conditional, conditioned by the two opposite dualistic polarities. But when you climb above the 48th level, you can begin to have some intuitive sense that you're connected to something outside your own mind. And I think at the lower levels above the 48th, you can't experience unconditional love because you still have too many of these subconscious selves that are putting conditions on yourself. And I think it's probably only when you approach or perhaps even go beyond the 96th level you can really experience it, really open yourself up to unconditional love. And well, let me rephrase it a little bit, because I think, as I've said many times, the core of our being is the conscious you, and it has the potential to step outside of your outer mind. And when you step outside, you can have various experiences. And one of them can be your just neutral state of awareness. But it can also be that you feel loved and cared for. I'm not sure that you can totally... So what I'm saying is you can certainly experience a love that's beyond the human, even below the 96th level. I don't know if you can fully see it as completely unconditional. I'm not sure you can fully accept that God's love really is unconditional. And I think that's only when you go a little higher and you understand the reality of free will is that in an undescended sphere like we live in, and I explained this in my video about how the world was created, in an undescended sphere, God isn't really concerned about what we're doing, because nothing here is permanent. We're just experimenting with our free will. So it's not that God is judging us, saying you shouldn't do this. God loves us unconditionally, no matter what we're doing. There are no conditions in God's love. It's not dependent on our actions, on our choices. It's just there. The only question is, can we experience it or can't we? And when you come to that point where you have cleared out enough of these subconscious selves, that the conscious you can step outside and experience unconditional love, well, that's when you really fathom what unconditional love is. But you don't understand it with a linear mind. You can experience it or not experience it. That's why what is unconditionality? I cannot give you an explanation of this. I can explain what conditionality is and say unconditionality is beyond that, but you cannot understand it linearly, intellectually. But when the conscious you steps outside of the outer mind, you can experience something that is beyond conditions, even the neutral state of awareness. And you could, in a sense, say that unconditional love is sort of a tricky wording to use because, as I said, love on earth has so many meanings that are conditional. So is what you're experiencing really love? Well, certainly not in an earthly sense. So you could say it's just unconditional. But there is a meaning in saying love because we have the 7 spiritual rays that represent certain God qualities. And they all have, in their origin, they are unconditional. So you could say that the first ray, will and power, in its purest form, it's unconditional power, unconditional will. Second way, wisdom, unconditional wisdom. Third way, love, unconditional love. There is always something beyond any conditions that can be defined in this world of form. And you really only grasp this when you realize, as I said in my video about how the world was created, that we have the spiritual realm, which is ascended, and then we are living in an unascended sphere. And in an unascended sphere, everything is conditional in a way. Not necessarily in a dualistic sense, but it's conditional. But in the spiritual realm is beyond the conditions we find in this unascended sphere. And the way for you to ascend is that you go beyond all the conditions that you have defined for yourself in your own mind and these subconscious selves. And you come to accept yourself as a being who is beyond any condition in this world. That's how you can ascend to the spiritual realm.